Hello there, folks. It's Ed again. Today's video is covering some general diet and nutrition concepts that I've used to help me with my weight loss and to work towards the general improvement of my health. With that said, I wanted to put out a few quick but important notes before we continue. First and foremost, I am not a dietitian. I'd highly recommend that you get a dietitian if you don't have one already. I'm also not a doctor. I highly recommend that you reach out to your doctor in order to be able to get a recommendation for a dietitian. It's also really important to understand that everyone's bodies are different. What worked for me may not work for you. This is specifically my story on how I conquered my diet and nutrition. And I'm really hoping to motivate people who watch the video to reach out to their doctor and or dietitian to help them lose weight. But with that said, I'm also happy to answer any questions that you may have about my journey. And I'm really hoping to build a community here to help others to become motivated to start or continue with their weight loss journey. Let's talk a bit about my diet and nutrition experiences. So growing up, I wasn't taught what a portion size was. And instead of listening to my body and telling me when I was full, I was expected to clean my plate. Here's some examples of what I would eat. For breakfast, I would eat 2 to 4 eggs. I would have toast with butter and jam or jelly. It would be very common to have 1 or 2 or potentially more sausage patties. I would also usually have a bowl of cereal. I would have orange juice to go with that as well. And sometimes I would also have a slice or 2 of toast. For dinner, I would usually have a protein. And it was usually pork or chicken. It was rarely beef. Usually the pork and chicken was pretty dry, so we would usually have something served with it, such as barbecue sauce or A1 sauce or something along those lines. We would also have things like corn, but it wasn't just a corn on the cob or a side of corn, but it usually was corn that was covered in salt and drowned in butter. It was very common to us to have corn on the cob and put a stick of butter on top and just move it back and forth and reapply it multiple times over the course of the meal. We'd also have mashed potatoes, and these were usually made with whole milk or cream. We would also put in multiple sticks of butter and loads of salt. We would also have peas, and these would also be drowned in butter. And we would have multiple slices of bread, and these multiple slices of bread would usually be served with butter or margarine spread. The portion sizes that I was taking in, even as a kid, were really quite a lot. Understanding portion sizes is very important. Most people really don't understand, or they're not really taught to understand what a portion size is, and so they don't understand it very well. As a result, people often overeat or often overorder food and make too much of a given food item whenever they're cooking. As a result, we tend to eat all of the food that's put in front of us because we just don't know what that quantity is, or potentially we're not interested in wasting food. I don't know about you, but growing up, I was told to never waste food. So my lack of understanding portions and portion control really just made it difficult growing up to eat well. So I'd like to talk a little bit about why it's difficult to go out and eat if you live in the United States and you don't understand portion sizes. Fast food up until recently has been so cheap that it was very easy to buy large quantities and just eat all of it. I thought I would give you some examples of what I used to order whenever I would go out and eat. This is me mostly in my 20s. Now, keeping in mind, I am originally from Kentucky, and so some of these places are directly correlated to the fact that I was raised and lived in Kentucky for a while. One example is going to Waffle House. It was very common for my wife and I to go to Waffle House, and when I would go there, I would order 6 eggs, 4 pieces of toast with butter, sometimes a chocolate waffle. Obviously, if I'm going to have a waffle, I have to have syrup. I would have chocolate milk, and I would eat all of that in one sitting. Another example of a restaurant that we used to frequent was White Castle. White Castle had this concept of a sack of 10, where for very little money, you can get 10 little mini hamburgers in one sack. We would very often go and order several sacks of 10. We would also order a side of chicken rings. I would order a huge chocolate shake to go along with that. I would also get a Big Red to go with it. So if you're not from the South, Big Red is just kind of like a cherry soda drink. So I used to get a large version of that. And again, I would eat all of this in a single setting. I would also go to Taco Bell. Taco Bell was cheap, so I would buy multiple tacos, burritos. I love gorditas. I would usually have between 4 to 6 of these. Not the gorditas. The gorditas, I would usually max out around 3. But their tacos were essentially nothing. I would have 4 to 6 of those in one sitting. I would also buy several empanadas. I would buy the largest soda that they had, and then I would also eat all of that in a single sitting. It was also very common for us to go to McDonald's, and there I would buy a 20-piece chicken McNugget and get a ton of barbecue or honey sauce or both. I would also buy a cheeseburger or a Big Mac to go along with that. I would get a value meal and usually have that supersized. And so say, for example, I would order a Big Mac value meal, supersized with fries, a soda, usually a Coke, and I would eat all of that in one sitting. But hands down, my absolute favorite was pizza. And my go-to pizza was Little Caesars. And I would buy a large or extra large pizza. I would usually buy several orders of crazy bread as well. We would also buy a couple 2 liters of Coke. And again, I would just eat all of that in a single setting. When you're starting to lose weight, you immediately think, well, I can never have these things again. The honest answer is, it is very possible to go out and eat at these places, even when you're trying to lose weight. But it's important to understand what quantities looks like. What does a serving size actually look like? Understanding what the total amount of calories that you're taking in. I've lost weight while still going to and having fast food and going to sit down restaurants. It is very possible to go out and still have a social life. You're not going to just sit at home and eat salads all the time. So one of my current favorite examples is I go to Wendy's. Usually I'll go and I'll have a single with cheese. I'll have that with ketchup, but instead of eating the whole bun, I'll only, take the bottom bun off. I'll roll that kind of into a burger taco. I will also get a 4 or 6 piece nugget, and usually I'll have that without sauce. And when I have drinks, I drink water. If I'm really in the mood for something other than water, usually it'll be unsweet tea. You can also order from the kids menu. You can get smaller quantities in kids meals. And the cool part is that the calorie amount for the kids meals is much less than what you get from an average adult menu item. But there's usually healthy options such as fruit instead of fried foods inside of the kids menu. Another example is going to sit-down restaurants. It's very possible to go to these and have a great meal and have a good time. What you have to keep in mind is that when you go to these restaurants, they're going to serve you huge plates with huge portions. And you just have to keep this in mind when you're ordering. When you go to restaurants, you have to understand you're going to be served significantly more than a single portion. Usually when I'll go to a restaurant, I'll go with my wife and we'll order a single entree. And what we find is that this single entree can feed 2 to 3 people. Generally, we'll eat half of what's served to us and we'll have leftovers, and we bring that back and we can have that for lunch the next day or potentially even dinner the next day. We also never eat chips or bread or any other of the free foods that they bring to the table. This is just empty calories. We also generally only drink water. If I'm in the mood, I'll order unsweet tea, but 9 times out of 10, I just drink water while I'm at the restaurant. Not only does this approach reduce the amount of calories and in turn cutting the amount of food, in turn, our food bill is cut in half because we're only ordering a single entree and then we're splitting that. And then we typically have, food left over for the next day. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about macros. My life changed significantly once I understood what a macro is. Beforehand, I would eat whatever I wanted anytime I wanted. As a direct result, I gained a lot of weight and I was overall pretty miserable. But now I understand that it's important to take in the required number of macronutrients that's needed to provide the required calories and energy so that I can get what I need to power my body. It's important to understand that calories come from 3 types of macronutrients. First, let's talk a bit about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, or carbs, are the main source of energy for your body. And these are found in things like breads, pastas, fruits, vegetables, and grains. These in turn, when you eat them, they break down into something called glucose. And glucose is what's used to fuel your body's cells. There's the concept around simple carbohydrates, and these really equate to things like sugars. And these break down incredibly quickly, and they spike your blood sugar. And then you have complex carbohydrates, and these are things like whole grains. And what's nice about more complex carbohydrates is that it takes longer to break down, and in turn, it has a slower release. Where sugars spike your blood sugar immediately, complex carbohydrates take longer and will in turn release slower over time. Next, you have proteins, and proteins are essential for building and repairing tissues such as muscles. And this is found in things like meat, fish, eggs, dairy, beans, and nuts. And these are critical for maintaining muscle mass and helps to prevent muscle loss, especially when losing weight. So one of the things I found fairly early on as I was starting my weight loss journey is that in addition to losing fat, I was losing muscle as well. And so it became very important to make sure that I was taking in enough protein in order to make sure that I wasn't losing that muscle, which was very essential for just the overall health of my body. And finally, I'd like to talk about fats. Fats are absolutely necessary for your health, despite what you may have heard to the contrary. And these are required for hormone production, brain function, and vitamin absorption. So it's absolutely essential that you get enough fat in your diet. And so fats are found in things like oils, butters, avocados, nuts, and fatty fish. Healthy fats are part of a balanced diet. Managing the intake of macros is really the key to weight loss and management. Different diets manage different intakes of different macros. Some diets might be higher in protein to help with some muscle retention. Some diets might be lower in carbs to promote burning fat. But really, it's important to talk to your dietitian to get your own custom macros to help you with your weight loss journey. And during my weight loss journey, I learned that there's this concept of a BMR, or a basal metabolic rate. I hope I'm saying that correctly. So the BMR is the calories that your body will burn just to survive. Your BMR is going to be different, and it's different for everybody. There is a formula that you can use to determine what your BMR is, and I'll leave a link to a calculator down below so that you can see what your BMR is. Let's assume that you have a BMR of 2,000. But you're taking in roughly 3,000 calories. Well, in this case, there's a high probability that you're going to gain weight. If you have a BMR of 2,000 and you're taking in 1,700 calories, then there's a very high probability that you're going to lose weight. But people who are more active need to take in more than their BMR to maintain their weight. And this is because you're actively burning more calories than what your body needs just to survive. For example, I go for a run, I could potentially burn, say, 500 calories. Well, I need to make sure that I'm making up for that additional calorie burn. Athletes, or people who exercise a significant amount, really have to increase their calorie intake quite a bit as a direct result. As I mentioned in my introductory video, I subscribe to the calorie in and calorie out method of eating, but I'm also making sure that I'm hitting my macro goal at all times. When I first started to lose weight, I just needed to reduce the total number of calories that I was taking in per day. It's also very feasible because I was taking in easily over 5,000 calories on a given day, depending on what I was eating at the time. It's really just about having a calorie deficit. And there's lots of calculators online to help you understand what kind of deficit that you should be on. If you're unsure, start with a 100-calorie deficit the first week and see if you see weight loss by the end of the week. If not, you can keep increasing the deficit until you start seeing some loss. About 1 pound to about 1.5 pounds per week is really ideal. Any more than that, you're probably having too big of a calorie deficit, and you should increase your calories until you're losing more slowly. Again, about 1 pound to about 1.5 pounds. Some dietitians and doctors can say up to 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds is okay. But again, this is why you really need to have a doctor and dietitian helping you out. As I mentioned in my introductory video, it takes years to put on weight. You're not going to get this off your body in days or weeks. It may take 1 year or 2 years or 3 years to meet your goals. It just depends on how heavy that you are. It's really important to understand that this is not a sprint. It's a marathon to get to your end goal. One interesting thing that I learned as I was losing weight was that just because my calorie deficit today wasn't going to be necessarily the calorie deficit that I was going to need tomorrow. You'll eventually have to adjust the total number of calories that you're taking in. You're going to be burning less calories over time as your weight decreases. Exercise, while it's helpful, will not be the sole reason for weight loss. It's really calories in and calories out, bottom line. Your metabolism will change over time as well, which will directly impact the calories that you need to be able to take in daily. Also, you should really be aware that you may plateau regularly. I plateaued quite a bit during my weight loss journey. A plateau is normal as your body's needs change over time. A plateau can vary in the time that it takes to break them. So I've had them last for a couple days, up to a few weeks, to a few months. But as I mentioned in my introductory video, the longest one that I had was over a year. I'm going to be talking about plateaus more in greater detail in a future video, but just be aware that if you are dealing with a plateau, it is possible to break them. Sometimes your body is just adjusting and it will automatically break the plateau without having to do anything. But sometimes you just will hit a calorie ceiling and you have to recalculate the total number of calories that you need to be taking in. And this is where the calorie calculators really become beneficial, or as mentioned, a dietitian and seeing your doctor. So the next topic that I'm going to be discussing may be controversial, but it's really important to understand that everyone's different. My journey led me down a very interesting path, and it in turn meant that my caloric intake had to be dropped down fairly significantly, specifically so I could break my plateaus. My goal here is to share my story and what I did in order to achieve my goals. Just because this worked for me doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work for you. And instead, you really should make sure that you're talking to your doctor and your dietitian. I typically try to take in no more than 1,000 to 1,200 calories on a given day. Now, to be clear, this is not a hard rule, but this is what I'm currently doing in order to meet my weight loss goals. In general, I'm really needed to do this in order to break the plateau that I've been on for a year. My calorie intake specifically has been approved by both my doctor and my dietitian. I did not come up with these numbers by myself. I do regular checkups to make sure that everything is going okay. And so this includes visiting my doctor and the dietitian. I also do regular blood work to make sure that all of my levels are exactly where they need to be. And I will make sure that I'm trying to stay vigilant with my health. And more important, I'm listening to what my body is trying to tell me at all times. Technically, I also fast at night. I typically don't eat anything after 7 p.m. and I only drink water or unsweet tea in the evenings. In the mornings, I'll usually break my fast the next morning around 9:30 a.m. and that's usually by eating an apple. So that's roughly about 14 and a half hours of fasting in total. What exactly does 1,000 to 1,200 calories a day look like? In the morning, I'll usually have a medium apple, and this is usually again around 9:30-ish in the morning, sometimes slightly earlier, sometimes slightly later. It just depends on how busy I am with work. Then I will have lunch around noon, and this is roughly 400 to 500 calories, depending on the day, but it's pretty average. Usually I'll have a sandwich, which will consist of 2 slices of keto bread, and this is roughly 40 calories a slice. It allows me to have 2 slices of bread because they're 40 calories a piece, whereas a single slice of bread, just regular traditional bread, could be like 100 or more calories per slice. I'm getting the benefit of having bread, but not really calorie dense bread. For a protein, I'm usually having chicken, turkey, or ham. I tend to alternate my proteins, although it seems like these days that I'm really tending to stick a little more towards chicken. It also really helps to prevent boredom by switching out the proteins. What's interesting though is that I tend to find that hams tend to be a little too sweet for me these days. I also will include a slice of cheese, and typically this will be American or pepper jack cheese. I usually, again, rotate my cheeses to prevent boredom, but I also like the way the different cheeses interact with the different proteins. I include vegetables on this as well. It usually is just lettuce. I do try to get in as many vegetables as I can with my sandwich. To add additional flavor, I used to use things like, dressings and whatnot. I realized that these things are incredibly calorie dense, so I now use a combination of jalapeno mustard and buffalo sauce, and we apply that to the 2 different slices of bread. The benefit here is that it's just incredibly low in calories, but it's also really, really tasty. I like spicy foods, so I think it really brings out the flavor and gives you an additional kick. It keeps it interesting. And hey, it's jalapenos, right? It's more vegetables. In addition to my sandwich, I will also usually have a half can of soup. And it's usually Progresso. They have a really nice light soup that's pretty low in calories. It's like 100, 120 calories for a half can. I usually switch between Italian Wedding and Chicorina. I'm just a big fan of both of those. Finally, to finish up my lunch, I will usually have some kind of fruit. This is usually like a half cup of grapes. If these aren't available, I'll usually go with cherries. They tend to be pretty expensive, but I will tell you, if you do end up getting cherries, buy a cherry pitter. It's just absolutely life-changing. It makes it so super easy to eat cherries. I also like to include strawberries, but only when they're in season. Around 3 to 3:30 p.m., I will usually have another apple or just another piece of fruit. Dinner is usually served at 6 p.m., and this is between 400 and 500 calories. And so we meal prep, so we get to have a different meal every night. And I can eat just an absolute wide variety of meals. So some examples are American, Mediterranean, Mexican, German, Indian, Italian, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, African, Cajun or Creole, Middle Eastern foods, Polish foods, English, vegans. It's just a wide gamut of different food types. I know my lunches sound kind of boring, but my dinners tend to be a bit of an adventure. It's always something different every night, and it's always something that we really enjoy. We're always rotating out different recipes. Am never bored, nor am I starving myself. I'm always feeling pretty full, and I never go to bed hungry. But it's also important to switch things up. And it's not just about preventing boredom either. Switching things up really ensures that you're changing things and you're switching things so that your vitamin intake also changes. So you're getting different minerals and stuff as well. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give to anyone who's looking to lose weight is reading nutrition labels. I read nutrition labels, and you should too. It's really important to understand the calories and nutrients of the foods that you buy. It's also critical to understand what a serving size looks like for the foods that you buy. So again, it's about understanding portions. The nutrition information should be used to determine if the food will help you achieve the macros for your food intake. Labels break down the amount of carbs, proteins, and fats in a given serving. It's really also important to understand that the label will really help you understand how many servings are in a specific thing as well. So just because you see, say, a can of soup doesn't mean that that can of soup is a single serving. There actually may be 2 or 3 servings in that can of soup. So this also helps you balance your macros based on your dietary needs. It's also useful for identifying hidden carbs and fats in your foods. Processed foods contain added sugars and unhealthy fats that you really should be cognizant of when you're taking in food. These in turn can hinder your weight loss. They can also impact the health that you're trying to maintain fairly negatively. Labels help to find and identify these hidden items. Another big benefit of reading and understanding nutrition and labels is that you can use this information for comparing healthier food choices. So it's easy to compare different food products. And this can also help you be informed for options that have, say, lower calories, lower sugars, lower fats, lower sodium, etc. Labels also help you understand how certain foods can be very nutrition and calorie dense. Labels will help you assess that the nutrient quantity of a given food item. It also helps to understand how much nutrition that you'll receive from the intake of those calories. And finally, it helps you to find foods that provide vitamins, minerals, and other essentials without additional unnecessary calories. Another important lesson that I learned was to start listening to my body and understand when I'm actually hungry. So this means that I have really slowed down when I'm eating. I used to eat super fast. It was very, very common for me just to scarf down a full plate of food or even a second helping in just a matter of minutes. Usually, the food that I would eat would be incredibly carb heavy. And after a few minutes, I would just start bottoming out and I would feel just absolutely terrible. And I've since come to realize that having proteins in my diet is essential. Not only will it keep me feeling more full, I will feel full for a significant longer period of time. So I won't be going to the fridge and looking for additional food and won't be hungry later. And this is why I really tend to stay away from highly processed foods, specifically so that I won't have foods that are causing me to bottom out and then searching for food, an hour or so later. Slowing things down has a significant number of benefits. By eating slower, your body will tell you when it's full. I had no idea this was a thing. I'll just be sitting and eating, taking bites, reading something, drinking some water or tea. chew my food very well, take another bite. It's been, 15, 20 minutes, and it's like, oh, well, I'm full, but I haven't even finished all of my food. As a direct result, I'm just eating less. And it's not because, I'm necessarily, starving myself or anything. It's just that my body is just naturally saying, hey, you've had enough. You don't actually need any more. Kind of another side note is I also will make sure that I'm drinking plenty of fluids during this time. Lack of fluids can also cause hunger. And so making sure that I'm well hydrated while I'm eating also helps satiate me and make sure that I'm feeling full as well. These days, I just don't feel like I need to clean my plate anymore. I'll eat until I'm full. And if there's food left over, if there's enough, I'll save it for potentially another meal. But usually if there's just a little bit left, then I will compost that. You have to kind of get around those old ideas that are in your head and just be willing to toss out things that you're not going to eat anymore. Also, did you know that there's a bit of psychology when it comes to plate sizes? If you have a huge plate, I mean, look at this, it's like the size of my head. If you have a huge plate and this thing is full, you're going to eat more than if you have a smaller plate. And if this thing is full, you'll feel full by the time you get to the end of this plate, but this will hold significantly more calories for you than what the smaller plate will. I never eat off large plates anymore. I always go for the smaller plates these days. Another significant change my wife and I made was we got rid of all junk food. We simply don't keep junk food in the house any longer. And there's a couple reasons for this. First and foremost, people eat when they're bored. It's very simple for me to go and look in the fridge or look in the cabinet to see what foods might exist so that I in turn will eat something. If junk foods don't exist, then there's no reason for me to eat something. Worst case scenario, if I'm hungry, I'll understand that I'm hungry. I'll have a glass of water, see if that satiates it. Or if I'm still hungry after the glass of water, I'll have an apple or a banana or some other fruit instead. But I specifically avoid junk foods. I also try to keep myself engaged as much as possible. If my mind is engaged, I'm not thinking about food. Instead of going to the kitchen and looking for something to eat, I instead go and find something else. I'll play a game, I'll work on the house, or just go out and go for a run or do some kind of other physical activity. As a direct result, I've kind of trained my brain these days to not really think about food except for when I'm actually hungry, when it's actually time to eat. Another interesting side effect of that is that sometimes I'll forget to eat. It'll get to a point to where it's dinner time and we're or an hour and a half past. And it's like, oh, wait, I'm hungry, I think. And we realized, oh, well, it's well past dinner time. And so maybe we should actually eat something. Did you know that people also will feel hungry if they're dehydrated? It's a very common thing for you to feel hungry, but what your body's actually telling you is that it needs water instead. If I'm feeling hungry, the very first thing I do is I go and get a glass of water. I will drink that glass of water and give myself 10 to 15 minutes to see if I'm actually hungry or not, or if my body was just saying, hey, I need some water instead. When I first got into my weight loss journey, whenever I felt hungry, I would just go and drink a glass of water and wait, 15, 20 minutes and see if that hunger pain went away. The odd thing was, unexpectedly, 9 times out of 10, it did. I was just severely, underhydrated. As a direct result, it was really easy for me to satiate my hunger because I just drank a little bit of water and then didn't think about food again after that. This video is the first of several videos that I'm planning on talking about diet and nutrition. Some example topics that I plan on talking about are, for example, what are my macros? How did my wife and I plan our meals to ensure our weight loss? Unhealthy eating versus healthy eating, and what does that actually look like? My thoughts on the keto diet and why I stopped doing it. I was actually fairly successful on it. Overall, it felt like it just wasn't for me. Deep dives into reading food labels. I want to show you guys how I read food labels and how I make decisions about the foods that I put in my body. The impact of cutting out sugars and artificial sweeteners from my diet. I think this may have been one of the most significant changes that I made as a direct result towards my weight loss. Meal prepping for weight loss success. We love meal prepping. Not only does it make it so we only have to do a little bit of cleanup during the week, but it really helps ensure that our caloric intake is consistent throughout that week. And then finally, thoughts on gastric bypass versus losing weight naturally. So the feedback that I got from my initial video has been absolutely fantastic. And if you've made it this far, I'm really happy that you're here. If there are any topics that you'd like to discuss or hear about further, just let me know. Leave a comment down below. And finally, if you like the content, please consider giving me a thumbs up or potentially subscribing. I have a lot of really interesting video concepts in the future that I'm really looking forward to sharing with everyone.